So, a bit of background about me. I joined Porter in September 2018 and the Dash team in February 2019. It was my first software development role after I finished university. I have a science background, not a computer science background. And although I had some exposure to Java, I have very little functional programming experience. So really, Scala was the first language I worked with in this industry. Do we have any art lovers in this room? Does anyone know what that painting is? So this painting is called The Scream, and it was painted by a Norwegian painter called Edvard Munch. Supposedly, it illustrates existential angst. And I'll let you draw the parallels between that and my experience. What I thought was that what I was facing was a large degree of complexity, both at the technical and the business level. And everything felt quite magical to me in the beginning. So what do you do when everything feels, as I said, magical? Well, you pep talk yourself into learning the language. There are quite a few good reasons for learning Scala, and I guess we all know, what these mean. The numbering is a bit wrong, but hey. So I'm just gonna stress the fourth one. So the fourth one is, I really like the fact that Scala pushes me to think about what I'm coding. I didn't feel like I got the same thing with Java, and also I like the fact that it is a mature language, so that allows me to make use of the good community that's out there on Stack Overflow or Reddit. Does anyone know this book? Yeah. So I personally felt like a 5-year-old when I started using this book. I felt like I was a 5-year-old looking to impress my friends. I wanted to brag to my friends about all these new shiny toys that I've been collecting. But imagine you're a 5-year-old, you have a very big bag, and you're looking for that one specific toy, that one specific shiny toy you want to show to your friends. And I was looking for that shiny toy in this book, but I couldn't find it. The reason is that the amount of Scala syntax you need before you can code a plain framework is significant, and this is an exceptional book once you hit the ground running. So the final approach, what I decided to do was to realize that the book focuses on functional programming, and to realize the fact that the language concepts should be picked up from elsewhere because they're not explained in any depth in this book. And most beginners really need a gentle introduction. That is to say, they need an optimized learning plan. And with that in mind, I will say one more thing before I hand over to my colleague Sarabjit. Everyone's journey is completely different, and it should be treated as such.
Cool. Thank you, Iulia. It's the joy talk. We are at the top floor. You can't get away so easily. Cool. So a bit of introduction about myself. I'm Sarabjit. I transitioned into Scala from Perl. I have 7 years of Perl experience. And here at YNAB, we use Perl to build our warehouse management system, which is quite cool. Then life was good as a Perl developer, but I wanted to learn a new language. I didn't have to look too far because we use Scala within the same domain to build our shipping and delivery service, which integrates with third-party carrier systems like UPS, DHL, etc. So that was the happy part of my life. Then, once I decided to move on to Scala, the challenges began. Oh, it actually did well. So there are a few things which I have pinpointed here, which was, first was the adopting Scala. Adopting Scala as a language was difficult. It was difficult and challenging. The new concept which it throws at you are really hard to digest at the beginning, and the learning curve is quite steep. Since I was an experienced developer, my productivity went down, and it was a little bit intimidating at the beginning. Scala is familiar to, its syntax is familiar to Java, which didn't help me because I came from Perl, so there was another learning curve because every book you pick up, it actually bases on top of prior knowledge to Java, so that didn't really help. The compilation time. So coming from Perl is an interpreted language. The turnaround time when you write a program to see its output is quite quick. Moving to Scala, the compilation took forever for me. So it was a little bit frustrating moving away from Perl. So these were the few challenges, but the biggest setback was the paradigm shift. So to talk about few of them, immutability. Every Scala book you pick up, the first thing it talks about is immutability. Coming from Perl, I was so used to mutating variables at every step. I couldn't see myself programming without immutability, without mutating variables. So it was hard. There was a mind shift which I had to do at the start of the journey, which was not really easy. Functional design patterns, I don't have to say much more about that because Iulia has already said it's a bit, a lot of jargons are introduced, and it takes a lot of time to grasp all those at the beginning. Apart from all those changes, I also had to change my tool set. I had to move away from Vim Editor, which I had mastered over years, to IntelliJ because the Vim support, the Scala support for Vim is not that great. So it was the journey to move to another editor was not that smooth. Scala build tool, also called a simple build tool, was not simple at all. Cool. So I have talked about things which were challenging which was challenging. I would move on to things that worked for us. Anyone who is looking to move to Scala, that these points might help them as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is, the first recommendation is quite obvious: read books, read tutorials, set your base right, and once you really dare, pick up the FP book. But mere reading that book wouldn't help, which I thought it would, but you have to do the exercises and not just copy from Git or somewhere. I think discussing the solution with other developers actually helped me a lot at the beginning. Cool. The next recommendation I would say is pairing, like do pair programming, because at the start of the journey, your mindset is more towards the imperative coding style rather than the functional style. So it gives you a bit of a buffer, or you get trained to move away from the imperative style to a more functional style. So I would recommend pair programming. Cool. Code reviews. A lot of programmers do not participate in code reviews at the beginning of their journey, thinking they can't contribute enough since they don't know the language enough. But I think one should participate because you learn from code reviews as well. Yeah. Cool. And the last thing I would say, attend conference, you attend evening talks, which you guys are already doing, so that does help because you learn a lot from these talks and the new libraries people recommend. So with that, if there is a top tip I have to give before I hand it over back to Iulia, would be to experiment with the code. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarabjit. So thank you for those tips. I am going to make a recommendation, and I'm going to start by saying that I'm the sort of person who spends their free time on Coursera. So, well, I I stumbled across this course called Learning How to Learn, and I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed it because it made me think about various things. It made me think that it's very important when you start learning something to think about how you're learning, not only what you're learning. So I started thinking about, when was the time when I was the most efficient while learning? How can I recreate that process? And answering these questions is very important for me. And with that in mind, I have the following 5 takeaway points from this Learning How to Learn course. And this course is delivered by someone named Barbara Oakley. And these are the 5 most important things that I've taken from the course. And I'm going to run very quickly through them. So there are 2 different ways of thinking: focused and diffused. So diffused is when you let your mind, link concepts together. Interleaving, testing, recall, and spaced repetition. And I think that most of you are very familiar with 3, 4, and 5, but the first 2 are the ones that I found most useful to think about. With this in mind, there are 3 rules that I came with. I devised for myself based on Barbara's course. So context setting happens when we set the scene. So for example, when you do background reading, and to make sure that we get the most out of our time for context setting, we need to play a game of mental ping pong between what Oakley calls the focused thinking mode and the diffuse thinking mode, where you keep thinking about a problem but allow random associations to occur. The second one is testing and recall. I cannot stress how important testing and recall it is. You need to start with the main concepts. Just forget about the details. You need to make sure that you get the basics right. And also, most importantly, you need to time yourself while you're recalling. The last tip that I found is interleaving. This is by far the most important one. This is when you mix problems of different difficulties, different concepts, because this tests your understanding, not just your muscle memory. You don't go through the motions. You're thinking actively about what you're doing. So I have a lot of other things to say about, this course. I really enjoyed it. But if you have any questions about the Learning How to Learn course, I'm very happy to answer later on. And I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening.